In the big city, Mark is the CEO of a large company. He has a very successful career that took him lots of hard work, especially after leaving behind a poor childhood with a violent father. Since Mark opened this company, he never visited his hometown in Kentucky again. One day, Mark gets devastating news: his father has died. He hates how upset he feels about it, considering how much he hated the old man, and he refuses to go back for the funeral. However, his wife Viora thinks it will bring closure and will let him reconnect to his roots, so they agree they'll go to Kentucky to pay their respects, even if their kids Samsara and Titan don't like the idea because they consider the countryside boring. Then Viora tells Mark about some trouble the kids got into at school, asking him to step in, but Mark barely scolds them before changing the subject. The next day, the family flies to Appalachia on Mark's small private plane. When they're getting closer to their destination, the family stops at a gas station to refuel. When Mark goes inside the store, he's shocked to notice really disturbing things on the shelves like human skulls, preserved animals, and insects, and he guesses it's for voodoo magic, which is very popular in the area and reminds Mark of his creepy childhood with his father. He grabs some snacks and goes to the counter, where he sees the store owner sewing a mojo bag. Curious, he asks the man about it, and he replies that mojo bags can protect someone from black magic, suggesting that the family should take some with them. However, Mark doesn't believe in this stuff and asks for the bathroom instead. The guy sends him to the back, where Mark finds a chemical bathroom, but when he sees the nasty state it's in, he decides to hold it for now. Meanwhile, Titan is having trouble getting a signal on his phone and asks a local boy that is passing by. The boy is impressed by all the fancy stuff the siblings have and teases them for it. He also asks about Titan's deformed hand, and he explains he got stuck like that after a fight. When Titan shares his destination, the guy gets scared and immediately leaves. Then the family takes off again, and Mark asks his kids if they're having a good time, but the siblings insult the place and mock the locals. Viora gets angry over their manners, so Mark asks the kids to put on their headphones, and an argument ensues between the couple. Viora thinks that Mark enables the kids' behavior by not disciplining them, but Mark says he doesn't want to be like his abusive father. At that moment, it suddenly begins to rain, causing the plane to start shaking like crazy. Mark tries his best to get the plane under control, but the winds are too strong and the plane can do nothing but crash. Mark sees everything go black and passes out. After having a nightmare about his father, Mark wakes up with bruises all over his body in a strange room, which looks like the attic of a farmhouse. Suddenly the homeowner Eloise comes in and insists that Mark should stay in bed. Mark resists as he desperately asks about his family, but instead of answering, Eloise calls for her husband Earl and their huge son Lewis. The family tries to calm Mark down, but he still tries to run away, only for Lewis to easily pick him up and throw him back on the bed. Afterward, Earl tells Mark that his plane crashed yesterday and that they found him alone, which Mark refuses to believe. He keeps asking about his family, so Eloise blows a strange powder over his face, which makes him fall asleep. Moments later, Eloise is seen making a voodoo doll of Mark and she brings it to him, calling it a boogity doll. She explains that she wants to nurse Mark back to health using this doll, and she places it on the window before securing it with salt to keep the devil away. As soon as she leaves, Mark starts looking for a way to escape, which is very hard because his foot is severely hurt and he must fight the pain not to scream. The door is locked, so he sneaks out of the window and climbs to the roof, then jumps from roof to roof as he tries his best not to slip because of the rain. Eventually he reaches the barn where Eloise has gathered with several other villagers, and Mark watches them through a hole in the roof. It is revealed that Eloise is a healer who uses her voodoo powers to cure people of their sickness and disabilities. When the ceremony commences, Earl announces that Eloise is going to use mere animal parts for her root work, but on the day of the blood moon she's going to do something much bigger. Then, the treatment begins with Earl killing a cat and cutting its tongue, which they put in a mute patient's boogity doll. Eloise proceeds to read some spells and suddenly the mute patient starts speaking. The crowd erupts in cheers, but Eloise isn't done yet. There's also a blind patient, so she places a goat's eyes in the guy's eye sockets and begins chanting spells again, making the guy instantly regain his eyesight. He immediately points at Mark, who panics and begins running away while Eloise and her family rush to the attic to check on him. Mark manages to make it back to the bed just in time, but when the family arrives, they immediately get suspicious because Mark is wet, the window is open, and the line of salt is broken. Eloise can tell he's lying but decides to let it slide before asking what he thought of her abilities. Mark still doesn't believe in her methods and compares Eloise to his own superstitious father, saying that her treatment is actually psychosomatic. This is a theory that if somebody believes in something desperately, it will physically become true. His words offend Eloise, who replies that people from her village believe in her because they don't have access to good health care. Then she locks the window and door before leaving. The next day, Mark wakes up to find a plate full of meat, which he eagerly eats. He enjoys the dish so much that he apologizes to Eloise for being rude yesterday. Surprisingly, she forgives him and goes to fetch another plate, this time leaving the attic door open. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Mark quickly grabs the bell attached to the door and removes the center before hanging it back, that way it won't make noise when he tries to escape. Then Eloise brings more food and some bones, explaining that they can tell the future. She claims that these bones are telling her that on the day of the blood moon, Mark will get all the poison out of his body and meet his family. She asks him to throw the bones on the bed to learn more about his future, however he refuses to participate, causing Eloise to comment that Mark is like her son Louis before she got him straight. After Eloise leaves him with the bones, Mark gets bored and decides to assemble them. To his horror, he realizes that it's a human hand, and not just any hand. The broken middle finger implies it could be Titan's. Mark feels so sick that he throws up, and among the nasty goo he sees a piece of skin with Titan's tattoo. Even more desperate to escape now, Mark lockpicks the door and sneaks out of the room. He carefully drags his injured feet downstairs while biting down the pain, but when he makes it to the corridor, Eloise's pet bird alerts her of an intruder. Mark hides behind the wall while she looks around, and by the time she takes the stairs to find the room empty, Mark is already leaving the house. He then enters the woods, and after running in the dark for a while, he's shocked to come across the debris of the crashed plane. Mark checks inside and sees the blood of his family, but not a single body. At that moment, Mark notices a hut nearby and tries to reach it, but barely takes a step before he is jumped on and captured again. The next day, he again wakes up in the attic and looks through the window to see Eloise and Earl leaving for the market. Mark then removes the bandage from his feet, and to his horror, he finds a metal spike shoved there to keep him from healing or running away. With no other choice, Mark gathers all his inner courage and proceeds to painfully pull the nail out without screaming. Afterward he begins looking for his family, but there's nobody home. When he goes outside he finds 3 newly filled graves and immediately begins to dig them up, but it turns out they only have the sacrificed animals from the healing rituals. Next, Mark goes to the barn where he finds a basement full of all Eloise's dark magic tools, including a bunch of books and mutilated bodies. He goes through her books and learns that she is preparing him for the Blood Moon Day for the transference of life spell, during which a person's life is sacrificed to mend someone else's injuries. This explains the picture he finds of the family being impossibly old. It means they've been using magic to stay alive. After the initial shock is gone, Mark gets down to business and begins making a boogity doll of Eloise. Then he hides it under the front stairs and begins making his way back to the room, only to suddenly hear a phone ringing. After some searching, he finds the family's phones inside a box, but only Titan's works. Mark takes the phone back to the room but forgets to close the main door, so when Eloise returns, she quickly gets suspicious again. Mark is ready to defend himself with the spike, but when he hears Eloise order Louis to fetch the axe, he has no choice but to reluctantly put the spike back into his foot, which is as painful as it sounds. Eloise arrives at the bedroom and doesn't notice anything weird, so she decides to let Mark be for now. Once she's gone, it takes Mark a few tries to guess Titan's password and he finally manages to call 911, being surprised and relieved when a cop tells him that his family came to the police station a week ago and reported him and Titan missing. Mark tells him he's being held hostage by a couple called Eloise and Earl, and the cop luckily recognizes the names, so he promises to get there as soon as possible. Moments later, the cop arrives outside the farmhouse and talks to Eloise while Mark removes the spike from his foot again. Unfortunately, Eloise suddenly bursts into the room, furious because Mark called the police. She grabs his boogity doll, slams him on the bed, and uses a spell to make him lose his voice. She also wraps a thread around the boogity, which ties the real Mark up as well. After she leaves to meet the officer again, Mark hops to the window, but he can't say a single word to alert the cop. Refusing to give up, Mark grabs his boogity doll and hops downstairs, but by then, the policeman has already left. Mark still slowly follows the cop and eventually catches up to him. Then he struggles with the doll until he manages to put a thread in the boogity's mouth, allowing him to talk again. He explains everything to the cop, who takes Mark in his car and drives him away. However, Mark soon realizes that the cop is friends with the voodoo couple and he has taken him back to their house. Tonight it's the blood moon, so Mark is dragged into the barn, where the villagers have gathered to witness his sacrifice. He's shocked to see Viora, Samsara, and Titan are also dragged into this, but they're creepily unresponsive, meaning Eloise must have put a spell on them. Once the ceremony begins, Eloise blows her magic dust on Mark to make him fall asleep, then he's laid on a table while the villagers cheer. Apparently Eloise plans to replace Earl's diseased heart with Mark's, so she proceeds to make an incision on his chest with a dagger, but suddenly Mark wakes up, takes out the spike, and stabs Earl right in the heart. Afterward, Mark gets up from the table with a terrifying face, causing all the people to run out in fear as it's revealed that earlier Mark replaced Eloise's magic dust with something else, so he was only pretending to be asleep. Then Mark approaches his family and uses the original magic dust on them to make them wake up, confirming they're alive and well except for the fact Titan's missing a hand. After telling his family to run, Mark goes after the policeman, throwing a body at his car to make him panic. The cop comes out and shoots in the darkness, but Mark kills him first and takes the car back to the barn, where he retrieves the doll from under the stairs. Meanwhile, Eloise and the villagers return with the giant Louis and he bursts into the barn, ready to kill Mark. A brutal fight ensues, but when he's about to overpower Mark, Louis suddenly freezes and starts gasping before he throws up a lot of water and drops dead. Outside, Eloise finds Louis' boogity doll drowned in a bucket. Furious, Eloise screams and goes to confront Mark, admitting that he was smart to use Louis' doll but pointing out he can't do the same to her because she's hidden hers really well. Then she tries to stab him, but Mark blows the magic dust on her face, causing her to freeze instantly. Next, he takes out the boogity doll he made of her and hits it with a hammer, sending the real Eloise flying. Her body knocks over a wooden pillar and causes the barn to catch fire. As he leaves, Mark seals the only door with salt, so when Eloise tries to leave, she's stopped by an invincible barrier, meaning she'll die in the fire. The other villagers try to confront Mark, but he reveals he has all the dolls Eloise made and he isn't afraid to use them. As the fire engulfs the barn, Mark returns to his family, and after watching the flames with satisfaction, they leave in the cop's car. Sometime later, Eloise's hidden doll opens its eyes. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.